had to grow it. And so much so that he started breaking his business. And this is actually well documented in newspaper articles. He bought a ton of properties in downtown Orlando and a ton in downtown Jacksonville. He bought a helicopter to fly back and forth. He had like hundreds of millions of dollars of assets under what you might call like under management or under ownership. And it all came crashing down. I stopped working with him because I just couldn't put up with how he overclocked everything and made everything really challenging. But it was interesting, Pam, working with somebody who grew for the sake of growth really changed my opinion about growth, because the thing in the world that grows for the sake of growth is cancer.
Hey, y'all, and welcome to the Cash Flow Podcast, where we're going to talk about everything related to the money in your small business. I'm your host, Pam, and without further ado, we're going to jump right into our episode. Hey, everybody, my cash flow friends, welcome back to the show. And it is time for another version of our really popular segment that's going to hopefully change the way you think about success. We call it Know Your Map, and I have one of the people on my map here with us today that has literally changed my entrepreneurial trajectory. So I'm so excited he's with us. I'll introduce him in just a minute, but what we're talking about here is that replacement for the old corporate networking that we all wanted to run screaming from the building for. We want you to know your map. And by map, I mean the relationship map. What we're talking about is those real deal relationships that you get into. And by the way, are also end up being profitable. Remember, I'm a CFO. These are the relationships that have quietly, but very powerfully kind of shaped your entrepreneurial journey. Think about mentors, think about people you kind of chance encounter met that made all the difference in the world for you and became your best of friends, and how these friendships, if you're succeeding in business, are really the backbone of why you're succeeding. So this is how it all ties to cash flow. If you don't have a relationship map, it's hard as hell to be a business owner. And the man I'm with today knows more about that than most. We have Alex Charfen with us, and there's so many things to say about him that are important. I want to lead with the most important to me, and that is, this is a man of commitment and heart who completely gives into the work that he does and into his friendships all of himself. If you follow him on social media, you would see that. If you don't follow him on social media, I really recommend that you do. I'm going to read a little bit because I think it's really well written, that if you think about it, every day, members of this band of brothers and sisters with a very unique set of gifts that become entrepreneurs are born with some things that are going to drive them for the rest of their lives. They chase momentum. In fact, they long for it. And they're going to very often, as you know, have a really hard time fitting in those systems that are built for the rest of the world. And so if they're going to survive and thrive and to stay out of jail and not medicated, then they're going to change the world if we let them. So what Alex has done is really created and led a tribe where these people can thrive. He's written a book called The Entrepreneurial Personality Type, which if you have not read it, you need to. It's like reading a autobiography every time I pick it up. And Alex, just the way you teach, the way you help people in this situation truly thrive instead of maybe living with what they've grown up to be ashamed of. That it's a real skill set is wonderful. And I'm so glad you crossed my path. So welcome to Cash Flow. Thank you so much for doing this.
No, it's my pleasure, Pam. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So I'm going to run through a few questions for you, Alex, that I've prepared because I know you're a man who believes in the power of relationships as well. And I want to kick things off by talking maybe at the start of your entrepreneurial journey, which, if I'm reading right, started at about 8 years old, now that I think about it. Who's the very first person that you would say was part of your relationship map that really impacted your trajectory? What was kind of the aha moment when you went, holy cow, this relationship changed things for me?
That's interesting. As a kid, I was always very different than the other kids around me. I didn't do very well socially, didn't do great with teachers or with adults. I was kind of the I guess, like, outcast, black sheep. Like, that's how I always felt. I didn't feel like I
Mhm.
belonged in a lot of places. And I started working with my father when I was very young, and I definitely learned a lot from my dad of what I didn't wanna do and how I didn't wanna be. I did learn some life lessons from him too, but it was challenging. My dad had, like, 3 ways of communicating. It was rage, punitive teasing, and then just extended silence. And
Ugh.
I know now as an adult, that was from his trauma as a child.
Yeah.
But I think the first person who really had a massive influence on my life was a teacher that I had in high school. His name's Rick Lara. He was my speech coach, and I was in discussion and debate and speech and forensics and persuasive communication. I took speech classes throughout all of high school, and I met him when I was 13. I'm 50 now. I've known him 37 years,
Wow.
and he showed me that I had this skill set to get up in front of a room and be able to speak and influence people. And so when I think of like my trajectory as a child, it wasn't until I encountered him that I really felt like I could win and I felt like I could overcome things. I felt like I could create value and do things that meant something. And I was one of those kids that if something mattered to me, I couldn't stop paying attention to it. And if something didn't matter to me, I didn't even understand what paying
Got it.
attention means. And so when I was working with Rick, I learned how to speak. I learned how to debate, how to get in front of rooms. And I think, that's something that I've carried throughout my entire professional career.
That's amazing because you were still in the thick of that system that didn't work for you, and there was clearly somebody who stood out from it and got you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Rick was and is a totally different type of teacher. We've
Cool.
known each other for a long time. We're still in contact. But he was the teacher that had a lot of structure and a lot of process in his class. So, like, you felt safe in the structure, but then there was also a lot of challenge and a lot of doing uncomfortable things and getting in front of the room and talking and speaking. And like that it's such an interesting metaphor for business because in business, you need a lot of structure and a lot of process, but it's the process and structure that allows the creativity to come through, that allows the magic to come through. And, if I think about like that experience, that really reinforced that for me. If we're in a place where we have process and structure and routine, that's when creativity comes through. That's when what we really want comes through. That's when we build the life that we want. And so, yeah, I guess I don't know that I've ever looked at it like that until
Mm.
just now. But yeah, that had a huge influence on me.
It's a great thing that it came from 8 years old because one of the things I know you say a lot is I do follow you on social is, look, as entrepreneurs, generally, you're gonna hate structure, you're gonna hate process, but let me tell you that process and structure is absolutely critical to your success if you're this type that
Yeah.
naturally hates it, and you've done a lot of work to design process and structure that doesn't feel like process and structure, but has the same effect. And I know you touch on it a lot in the entrepreneurial personality type book and on your podcast. So what I'm hearing, and I didn't realize this, is you really for the first time saw that for yourself as early as 13 years old, that there was a way to be this person and still live in structure if the structure's done right.
Yeah. I mean, I
Huh.
don't think I had the realization all the way back then. I think what happens to us as entrepreneurs, Pam, like for anybody listening, if you fight process, structure, and routine, I relate so deeply. Because I think what happens to us as people with our personality type, like let's just be very clear about who we are. We're different than the rest of the world. Entrepreneurial personality types, the people who think like we do, we live in the future. We live out in creating something new. We are that small percentage of the population that goes into the future, creates a new reality, comes back to the present and demands it becomes real. And when you look at the most of the population, they live in the present. They're in the present. They're doing what they're doing.
Mhm.
And people with our personality type, most structures, most processes in the world don't work for us. This can go back to school, it can go back to a job that you had, it can go back to a system that you were in, a committee that you were on. We often feel like we're either surviving the system or gaming the system, but rarely do we feel like we're really served by the system. And
Correct.
so creates this aversion to any type of process, any type of structure, any type of routine, any type of repetition. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. I've been in school, I've been in the job, I've been in
Mhm.
that situation before. But I've been coaching and working with entrepreneurs and running my own businesses now for over 30 years. And what I've seen consistently is that when there's minimum effective dose process and structure, when you have a morning routine, when you have clear planning guidelines, when you have a system through which you run your business, that's when we really grow. And that's when we create the outcomes we want in the world. And so I think it's important for us to know that, yes, we are naturally going to fight process, structure, and routine due to the conditioning that we've had in those situations where we've been
Yep.
in a process. But once we allow it, and once we start accepting that minimum effective dose, appropriate process and structure and routine will actually set us free.
I
And
love that term, minimum effective dose. It applies to finance too. We don't want to strap you with bureaucracy. We
no,
want the minimum effective dose to make you have good information to decide from. That's
yeah,
really all we're doing. I love that term.
yeah, no, it's important because it's funny, Pam. Probably 6 months ago or 8 months ago, we were having one of our events, and I asked the audience, "Why did you get into entrepreneurship?" And I wrote all the answers on a post, like one of those oversized post-it notes.
Uh-huh.
And the answers were things like freedom and time and choices and autonomy and this long list of things. Not once did it say I want to work hard. Not once did it say I want to be overwhelmed. Not once did it say for 12-hour days or 14-hour, any of those things. We get into this world for freedom, but then we immediately give it up in order to get this thing we call success. But if we got into this world for freedom, then freedom is really success. And in my experience, what creates freedom is when you have the right minimum effective dose, process, structure, and routine. It sets you free. It gives you your time back. It gives you your energy back, reduces decision-making fatigue, lowers the pressure and noise in your life, and creates an environment where you actually know what you want. I think so many entrepreneurs are chasing an outcome
Hmm.
that when they reach it, it isn't really what they wanted. And it's
Yeah.
because
Oh my
we
gosh. And the
don't take
path
the
there.
yeah, we don't take the time and space to really understand what we want and what would feel effortless and exciting and fun for us. The entrepreneurs that I've worked with that create 8-figure and 9-figure and even larger businesses, they're doing stuff that's effortless and exciting and fun
Mhm.
for them. There's
That
this
is, yeah.
commonality. I know that
I
most people
love,
don't most people don't believe that, Pam. They don't believe that like you can have effortless, fun, and exciting business. But I look at like my friend Giovanni Marsico who runs Archangel. You
Archangel.
know Gio.
Mhm.
Archangel's now a multi-million dollar company. He's more profitable than he's ever been. He's also having more fun than he ever has. He designs
Mhm.
these events and experience and he has fun. And like, I spend a lot of time with Gio when I'm at his events and he is
Yeah.
always so excited for what's coming next.
Yeah. And
And so
enjoying
he's
it.
basically, yeah, he's taken his skill set to create experiences and he's translated them into a business where literally if you're around Gio, what he's doing, you can feel it's
Yeah,
effortless.
you
It's
can.
seamless,
That's
fun.
very true. And he's been through one of your systems
Oh,
trainings
sure.
too. I know
Sure, yeah,
that.
we work
This
more.
I know it made a big difference in how he operated. And the thing that I'm really hearing here is that just jumped right out at me was what you said. We go into entrepreneurship for our freedom, and then we immediately basically lock ourselves in jail and
Yeah,
create an outcome that's still a jail.
yeah.
And there is another way to get there, and that's what you're helping the world with, which I just love. All right, but let's switch gears just a little bit here, and I want to going back to the relationship map, and again, certainly Geo is one of those. Geo is how I met you, right? And that's one of the things I keep track of is how did I find and get to everybody I got to so that I can have
Yeah.
gratitude for the whole chain anytime I think of somebody. And so, what would be really neat to hear from you is an example of a time that you connected with someone who led you to a completely surprising opportunity that you never would have seen if you
Hmm.
hadn't crossed that person's path. And kind of how did that play out? Something you
Hmm.
didn't see coming and it was like, wow, this is this is new and
Hmm.
enlightening.
I have an interesting one for you, Pam. So
Cool.
I'll give you a little backstory so you understand why this is an important relationship that I had. So as a kid, I worked with my dad, and my father was an entrepreneur. He had a large accounting practice in Mexico. Then we moved to the United States. He had a large factory that created concrete roofing tiles. That factory failed. The business in Mexico didn't do really well. And so he kind of got to the place where he didn't grow. As a kid, I worked with my dad, and it was first working in a swap meet, like a flea market, selling
Hmm.
electronics. Then we had a big stand in the flea market. Then we had a permanent stand. Then it became a store. And once it was a store, it never really grew. It just kind of stayed the same. And that was hard for me as a kid, like watching the lack of growth, the lack of progress, the lack of like momentum was really hard. And then in college, after I had worked with my dad in college, my friend and I started a financial consulting firm. We were doing billing and collections for fraternities and sororities. And we were approached by, yeah, it wasn't really as impressive as it sounds. We did okay. We did okay,
Yeah.
but we sold the business to a company run by a guy named Cameron Kuhn, who I knew for a friend. We sold the software to him, and he turned around and used it for utility billing. So like here we are using it for like billing fraternities and
Wow.
sororities, this tiny little thing, and he turned around and made it in this huge thing. And I
Huh.
moved out to Florida to work with Cameron for what should have been a year. And you can look him up. It's Cameron Kuhn, Kuhn. And Pam, there was this crazy contrast working with my dad and working with Cameron because
Ah,
Cameron wanted to grow at all costs. He grew for the sake of growth.
wow.
We would get a deal and we would say, "Hey, it's going to take 6 weeks to deliver this deal." And he would come in and say, "Let's do it in 3." And he was investing in real estate and he was buying buildings in Orlando and in Jacksonville and like just had to get bigger numbers and had to grow it. And so much so that he started breaking his business.
Ah,
And this is actually well documented in newspaper articles. He bought a ton of properties in downtown Orlando and a ton in downtown Jacksonville. He bought a helicopter to fly back and forth. He had like hundreds of millions of dollars of assets under what you might call like under management or under ownership. And it all came crashing down.
wow.
I stopped working with him because I just couldn't put up with how he overclocked everything and made everything
Got it.
really challenging. But it was interesting, Pam, working with somebody who grew for the sake of growth really changed my opinion about growth because the thing in the world that grows for the sake of growth is cancer.
Huh.
Y- Cancer's mission is to grow. And when
Yeah.
I look at like the relationship I had with Cameron, his mission was to grow, but for no reason other than having a bigger scoreboard, having more dollars, having
Wow.
more assets, whatever it was. And I mean, I watched him blow up. Not working directly with him. The 6 or 7. I was supposed
On
to
the
work with him for a
side.
year. I made it about 8 months. But then afterwards, watching like this dramatic growth and influence and all this other stuff, and just sitting on the sidelines thinking, like, this is going to crash. I know he's going to crash. I've been inside and I watched it happen. And I think
Cool.
what ended up happening was it taught me that growth should be for a reason.
I
Growth
love
should be
that.
for a level of contribution. Growth should be for a level of impact that you're making. And yes, of course, I want entrepreneurs to make money and make a significant impact. And we should be financially successful and financially independent. But we should also know why we're growing. Otherwise, we just get into a place where we're doing it for the purpose of growth. And my friend Larry Hagner shared a quote with me that I know some people that are so poor, all they have is money. And
Huh. Truth.
but it's true.
You
It's
see it
true.
everywhere. And
You
again,
see it
that's
all the
another
time.
thing people don't believe because you hear all the time, yeah, 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 I'd be a lot less, I'll go ahead and be sad with money instead of sad without money kind of thing. And it's not real until you're there. You can just see it in people's eyes when there's only money and
Mm.
nothing else. And it's a it's dead eyes. It's crazy to see it. And that's I think why I connected with you so much because clearly, you've had a purpose to make this tribe of people feel like they're normal is not the right word because they're not normal.
Mm-mm.
I love your term evolutionary hunters and they need a special container that looks different from everybody else's container to do what they need to do. And in your bio online, it's like, it's why we have a light bulb, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's why we're in space. It's all of those things. And they wouldn't be happening without this group having a place to thrive. So that's really neat. So you're the person who kind of took you in a direction that ended up being really valuable was because of the sort of bad example you saw of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I think as people, there's definitely people who've had massive positive influence on my life. And I would say Cameron had a massive positive influence in my life
Yep.
because I watched this person who was driven for no reason other than just getting something bigger and just
Yep.
making it more important and just making it more significant. And there was never really an outcome of like helping people or contributing or making the world a better place or any of those things. And in my experience, Pam, the people who build businesses like that, where they're just building for numbers, where they're just building for the sake of growth, eventually, because they get bored with it or they get
Mhm.
confronted by it or they're frustrated with it, it comes tumbling down. There's a level of um self-sabotage that happens because here's like an insight that I've watched over and over again is that if you're an entrepreneur and you are pursuing growth for the sake of growth, happiness is almost inevitably never going to be there because you can't grow enough if growth is the only thing you're looking for.
Because you
And
always
what
want more. There's
you
no
always want
end
more.
game.
Yeah. And so what often happens to entrepreneurs who are in that place of growth for the sake of growth is like me in my 20s, you start making a lot of money. I had hundreds of thousands of dollars in a checking account. I didn't know what to do with it because I was making a lot of money. And but I was still unhappy. You know, I wasn't fulfilled. I
Yep.
was unhappy. I was unhealthy. I was beating myself up. I was working 7 days a week. And here's what happened to me. The money in the bank actually became a judgment against me. It was like, I'm still not happy, even though I have hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank, eventually millions of dollars in
Oh,
the bank. I'm still
wow.
not happy, even though I've created this thing called success. And I see this happen with entrepreneurs all the time. Now, there's a flip side of that coin. When somebody is doing work that matters, that they care about, they're helping people that they really care about, they're making an impact, they're making a contribution. That money is a reflection of the change they've created in the world. That money
Mhm.
is
Value.
the well, and it's actually the confirmation that they have put energy out into the world and that energy has flowed back to them in a way that they've created a contribution. Capital always flows to contribution
Mhm.
long term. And so I think for us as entrepreneurs, like remembering why we're doing this and why we actually want to do this is crucially important because success can be like financial success can be incredibly hollow if that's all you have.
Mhm. And almost shaming. It sounds like it for you, it was like a shaming thing. It's like, "Oh, I've done this and it doesn't mean anything. Wow. Did I what can I do right?"
What the hell's going
And
on? It was so hard to
yeah,
handle.
I love it. And even though you have that was particular example, I think, of something that maybe should have happened to see that example. But in your career, I know you've told me stories of times when things haven't gone right.
Mhm.
And we all probably have those stories, but I'm curious, is there somebody who jumps out in your relationship map who was kind of there when things were bad for you? Your friend in the foxhole who made a difference, bailed you out somehow, emotionally, socially, financially, whatever you needed, but that sat there with you while things were awful. Um, is there that person in your network somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, when I was 30 years old, I met my wife, Katie, and
Ah,
I was at the end of a decade of growing a business to have offices in the US and Latin America. We were responsible for over $250 million in sales. We were a multi-million-dollar company. I had a tremendous amount of success, but it felt like nothing was going right.
huh.
And I met my wife after a really challenging period in my life where I was like on sabbatical. I wasn't dating. I was like kind of shut everything down and happened to run into her one night at a restaurant in Tampa. We were both traveling and we just happened to be there.
Wow.
And after a couple weeks, we exchanged numbers. I called her. After a couple weeks, she called me back. She waited 2 weeks. We're still working through that. Uh, but that was 20 years ago. That was 20 years ago next or 21 years ago next month, I think.
Wow, that's
And
fantastic.
yeah, and meeting Katie changed everything because she changed my perspective on what was possible in life. And I tell people like my parents gave me life, but Katie actually showed me how to build a life and how to have a real life.
I
And
love it.
I sold my company. We went into business together. We've been working together ever since. And it's brought a much higher level of purpose and commitment and reason to my life that I didn't have before.
I love that, and I love that your example is not an example not that there's anything wrong with these examples, but I love this one that it because it's not this, is it's not, "Oh, I lost all my money and so was there to help me put my business back together." It was, "I lost me, and
Mm,
Katie was there to work with me to put myself back together." And those are the things that I think sometimes we sacrifice, and yours is the opposite. I
mm,
just love that, and I love Katie, so I can absolutely see why and how that happened. Um, all right. Final act on these relationship questions. You ready?
sure.
Want to talk about the ripple effect. So, looking out at the horizon, how, and you're a great person to ask this question to because you see further into the future than anybody I know. And I love your example of where the people who go out there, find the thing, come back and try and do it. but who is it in particular who's like continuously or at some point really made you or enabled you, I guess, to think bigger, to look further and really think about your endeavors and the impact they can make? Now, you've made such huge impacts. I mean, during the downturn in the economy in '08 and '09, you, according to the US Treasury, shortened the life of the foreclosure crisis by 5 years. Okay. That's a pretty big flipping impact. How do you like look ahead and who helps you look ahead and go, I still have things to do?
Man, what an interesting question, Pam. Um, I mean, I have so many just incredible relationships in my life, like yourself included. I have this massive bookshelf here in my room and in my office, and so many of the people who've written these best-selling books are friends of mine.
Yep.
I'm in relationships with them. Like the people that I read growing up, I've been on stage with those people. I've met those people. I've spent time with those people.
Hmm.
But I think when you ask the question, the way you phrased it is like, who keeps me looking forward and who keeps me thinking about the future? I think it's my kids. I have a
Oh,
16-year-old
yeah.
and a 14-year-old, Reagan and Kennedy. And Reagan is like the best friend that I've ever had in my life. And Kennedy's the greatest teacher I've ever had in my life. And I watch them and I spend a lot of time with them and we spend a lot of time as a family. And I know that they're going to be here long after I am. And
Hmm.
so I project forward and I think like, what do I want this place to look like for my kids? And what kind of support do I want them to have in the world? And how do I want them to exist in the world? And so, I think that keeps me in a forward looking attitude of how do we make things better? And I don't think I would have ever thought that would happen before I had kids.
Huh.
But the
I love
day
that because you just recently, I think, took Reagan with you to Archangel.
yeah,
So it's a real and big part of your business that your family is involved, and it always has been since I've known you. Like you've
yeah.
always involved them, and that answer seems just perfect from you because you're going to do as much as you can to make that ride for them something that's going to be their challenge and their fun and their life. And it also reinforces that whatever systems you put in place for yourself are working because you're able to have that time to even see and hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, Pam. When the girls were really little, I used to do a lot of like brainstorming around how I wanted to raise them and what guidelines we should follow and what framework should we follow. And man, I looked at
Mhm.
a lot of them out there and I didn't like any of them.
Hmm.
And there was this day where I was like writing down like what do I really want these kids to grow up? How do I want my daughters to be in the world? And I wrote down some qualities, but it didn't really feel like it made sense. And so I just started writing names. I wrote like the names of people who have inspired me. And I remember writing like Oprah Winfrey and Harriet Tubman and Rosa Parks and Ruth Bader Ginsburg and like Marianne Williamson. Like who are the
Mhm.
women that like I think of? And there was this commonality with all of them. They were revolutionaries.
Huh.
And I remember thinking, I want to raise my kids to be revolutionaries because the world will always be a revolution. But it gets interesting, Pam, because I asked myself, like, how would you raise a revolutionary? So number one, we don't impose a lot of, we haven't, and we won't impose a lot of beliefs on our kids. Like we let them figure their own beliefs out because they're beginning to lead a revolution. That's first and foremost.
That's what it is. Yeah.
We listen to our kids. Like when they were in a public school for a few months and they came to us and said, "Hey, this isn't working. It's really challenging. It's frustrating. It's upsetting. It's affecting us." We pulled them right out of the school. We listen to our kids. If you're a revolutionary, you need to be listened to. You need to believe that if you speak, people will hear you.
Mhm.
And I wanted my kids to feel safe. And so, we make minor corrections with the kids, but we're not parents who have a ton of rules. We're not helicopter parents. Like we let them go out and do stuff. Sometimes they do the right thing. Sometimes they do the wrong thing. We have family discussions around it. And so, I feel like I created that environment where the kids, where both of them will be able to go out and do what they want to do in the world. But we were working with a shaman a few months ago and he came in and like worked with our family a little bit. And I shared with him that desire that I had for my kids to be revolutionaries. And he said, "Alex, I suggest that you consider an upgrade to that revolutionary outcome." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean by an upgrade?" And he said, "Revolutionary implies that there's going to be opposition, implies that
Mhm.
there's going to be force, implies that there might be violence. He said, why don't you change your view of what is possible for your kids from revolutionary to transcendent?
Hmm.
Like, think of them transcending issues. Think of them rising above issues. Think of them changing the world because their perspective is so different. Nobody has heard it before. I'm getting a little emotional talking about this. And I remember when Edwin, the shaman we were working with, said that, I sat there and I ran through in my head, like, okay, is the way we raise them going to be transcendent? And like,
Mhm.
uh, they form their own opinions. That's transcendent. They're seen
Yep.
and heard. That could be transcendent. They know that the world around them is supporting them. That could be transcendent. And so that works. So I've upgraded my vision for my kids,
Yeah.
going from being revolutionaries to being able to transcend and change the world through transcendence.
And yet what you picked to teach them is exactly the right skill set, even though you were calling it revolutionary.
Felt
It's
so lucky that that happened.
yeah, I mean, that's I love that because it's and I tell you, this is the first podcast where I'm taking notes like I'm in a classroom. That I love those 4 things. It's, they've got to have their own beliefs, listen to them, make them feel safe, and have that family discussion sort of brainstorming and sharing unit put together. And I think you guys really, really exemplify that beautifully. So
Thanks,
um,
man.
I love that. So one more thing before we go. So I want to encourage everybody who has not read, even if you have read it, it's time to read it again, which I've done recently because you've been talking about it, the evolutionary personality type. It really is encompassing. It's a big hug and at the same time wake up call for us. I think that we have work to do and there's a place to do the work. It's not horrible work. It's not 12 hours a day grind. Like you're saying, there's a way to build that business we wanted to build when we first started out. And then I also know people, Alex's podcast is amazing. It's called Momentum. You've been doing this for how long now? The Momentum podcast. I was thinking you had a new one, but this is the one I've been listening to forever.
I think we started in
Seems
2016,
yeah.
2015 or
So
16. So
one of
yeah,
the old guard with the podcast, and I don't ever walk away from that podcast without picked something up to do. I often have to pull off the side of the road because otherwise I'd be trying to write notes while I'm driving, which is never good. Um, but I absolutely love those. And Alex, anything else you've got to kind of share about the book or the podcast that might be something any one of the folks listening today can take away with them and just kind of put into action?
Yeah, you got it, Pam. So right now, we made the decision a couple weeks ago, actually, at Archangel, to make the full electronic copy of the book free for any entrepreneur who wants to
Oh
read it.
my
And
gosh.
so you can go to freeeptbook.com. So like free entrepreneurial personality type book.com, download the
Wow.
electronic copy. You can buy a hard copy if you want the souvenir. But the reason I'm giving it away is I want more entrepreneurs to understand this information. I want more entrepreneurs to understand themselves better. This book, the subtitle is Your Guide to the Most Important and Misunderstood People Among Us.
Yeah.
And the whole goal of the book is that you understand yourself and are able to create massive momentum and release some of the suppression that the world has heaped on top of you, some of the negative loops and spirals that we all get caught up in,
Mhm.
and be able to go out and make your greatest contribution. And I think for me, the path to making our greatest contribution is a path of self-acceptance and self-understanding and self-love. And God, has that been hard for me to understand. I remember
Yeah.
people used to say, Alex, all you need to do is love yourself. And I wanted to turn around and say, can you go F yourself? Because I
Yep.
didn't understand what
I'm
they
sure you
meant.
something else.
Yeah, yeah, I didn't understand what they meant, but now at I'll be 51 next week,
Mhm.
or
Oh,
week
happy
after.
birthday upcoming.
Thank you. And at almost 51, like, I know that the path to our greatest contribution is through doing what we enjoy, through doing what feels timeless, through doing what feels exciting, and the way that we understand that is by really understanding ourselves, accepting ourselves, and loving ourselves in that order. I don't think it comes in any other order. And the entrepreneurial personality type book will give you a massive shortcut in doing that.
Yeah, I agree. Oh my God, I love that. And folks, I really encourage you. This has been thick with lesson. I'm going to go back and listen to it again. I know my producer is going to be listening to every single word. And I hope that you keep this one wherever you listen to podcasts and come back to it. Because literally, as I think back through our conversation, Alex, there are so many takeaways in that. You really do pack so much into I can't wait to see your new keynote. I know you've got a new one going. I'm going to have to find where you're going to be doing that next and get there because I'm still unpacking the one I've heard 3 years ago and still referring back to it and making decisions based on it. So keep doing what you're doing in the world. Give my love to Katie, if you would.
You got it, Pam. And thank you. Thank you
Awesome.
for this. It's always good to see you. And I'm glad you're out there helping entrepreneurs with finances because, man, when you understand your numbers, everything else in the world gets so much easier.
That is the truth. But alone, like you said, the money doesn't do it alone. It's all balance, which is why we work on so much more. Folks, I wish you a fantastic week. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Pam.
I hope that video was helpful, and I hope you subscribe to my channel for more information on finances in your business.